Welcome. You're probably watching this video because your instructor has assigned a research appointment assignment with the SFCC library. In preparation for that assignment, we want to discuss the research process. One, because we hope that it'll make that research appointment more meaningful for you and provide some context as to the purpose of it, and also to helping you become a more strategic researcher. So let's talk about the research process really quickly. Now, typically when we think of the research process, we think of something like getting a research assignment. Usually that comes with the process of having a topic idea. Now, typically when we pick a topic idea, it might be something that we're somewhat familiar with already, something we learned in class, or something we're not familiar with at all. But usually we have some idea about kind of what direction we want to go. So the thought process here is that I'm going to pick this topic, I'm going to research, and a lot of times students feel like they're going to find sources that kind of support this topic idea that they've already come up with. And then once they have those resources to support that topic idea, they'll write their thesis statement and then write their overall paper. And to be really honest, that would be lovely if how the research process worked, because it would be really simple and to the point, but it is not actually how that process works. And actually trying to research in this way makes that process more difficult for you. So I want to introduce another way of thinking about research as a process. Just like writing is a process. You go through many drafts, there's many different phases, and sometimes it can get really emotional because you're feeling really excited that you're finding those sources that match what you're looking for, and then sometimes frustrating because you're not finding those sources. It's not matching that idea that you came up with originally. So I want to introduce a different way of conceiving how to think of that research process. So once again, we're going to start with something like your research assignment. And then typically you do need to brainstorm some sort of broad idea that might be related to what you're already learning in class, something that you want to learn about more or explore, or maybe something related to your own personal experience. Now, at this point in the process, don't assume that you are an expert on this idea or topic, even if it's something you're somewhat familiar with. You need to do what we call either pre-research or pre-exploration. And this is where you get familiar with your topic. You're not going to jump in and just find the resources that you're going to use for your paper immediately. No, first you have to get familiar. You need to know the names of people involved, the dates, the places that it occurred, certain events. You need to become familiar with the topic before you can even dig into researching it. And this is a step that I think we do naturally, but if we think that we're just going to jump straight into that main part of research, this part can get frustrating. So the important thing is to start early and let this be a natural part of your process. Another step that we tend to skip is creating something called a research question. And a research question is pivotal in making this process flow smoothly for you. So in fact, I'm even going to take a step outside of this flowchart for a moment and talk in a little bit more detail about what a research question is. So on the screen here, we have an example of taking something like a broad topic and narrowing it down to a research question. In the example on the screen, our broad topic is global warming. And you can see from step 2 here, we're exploring all the different aspects or maybe different parts of global warming that we might find interesting. Now, we're breaking this down step by step because global warming is something that you could write an entire book on, not just a 3 to 5 page paper or presentation. So we really need to narrow in. One of the things we notice at the library is that students really struggle with focusing a topic because it feels like if it's not broad enough, you're not going to have enough to write about. But that's not true. If you focus it to the appropriate level, by the time you find the resources required for this assignment, you'll have plenty to say, I promise. Let's go back to the screen here for step number 3. So you can see that we've taken our broad idea, we've broken it down into various parts, and now we've created a more specific research question compared to our broad topic. How will overconsumption of fossil fuels affect global warming in the United States from 2025? So you can see here that we've gone from a very broad idea to something that is more concrete, more specific, something that I could handle within the assignment scope. And the important part of phrasing this as a question is that this question will guide our research. And that's because we will research looking for the answer to this question. So let's take a moment and go back to that flow chart and why this is important. That's because at this point we're going to do what probably we thought we were going to jump into initially, just digging into that information section when we're doing the main part of our research. And what's important about creating this research question is instead of looking for sources that just support that broad idea that I already thought I had, that I already thought I knew what I wanted to say, which honestly is much harder to do, and you're making it more complicated for yourself. Instead, I'm looking for information that answers my research question. So I'm not looking for a specific point of view, I'm looking for answers to that research question. Now, at this point, we're going to go into what we call information refinement. And this is where we kind of take a step back. We look at those sources that we found, we evaluate them for their credibility and also their relevancy to our topic. So this is another reason why creating that research question is so important. It helps us keep on track so that we don't kind of get lost or meandering in answering that research question, and our thesis statement in the end can remain focused. So I want to take a moment and pause here and reiterate. The research question makes this process easier because it lets us stay on track, but then also we're not trying to find answers to a preconceived notion. We're just answering that question and making that process flow much more easier for ourselves. At that point, we'll come to what we call a search closure. So you found your resources and you're going to create your thesis statement. So the idea here is that the research question will not only keep you on track, but the answer to it is your thesis statement. We've also given ourselves some leeway to let that research guide us. That's the purpose of research to start with, right? You're not supposed to go in with a preconceived notion. No, you're supposed to let the research tell you what your thesis is going to be in the end. And if you do that, this process becomes a lot less frustrating. However, it is important to note that you will jump back and forth between different phases here. For instance, as we work on our pre-exploration and creating our research question, maybe our research question will change and we'll have multiple drafts the more that we learn. And that same can be said from our information collection phase to creating our research question. So don't think that one phase is done, check the box, you'll move on to the next. Sometimes it takes multiple iterations and drafts. So if that is happening in your research process, know that that is perfectly natural and how this process is supposed to work. Now, if you are here because you're completing a specific research assignment related to creating a research appointment with a librarian, know that your instructor might have sent you specific instructions, but there are different types of research appointments targeting each phase of this process. So as you complete this assignment, make sure you check in and see where you are in the research process and what you're being asked to do for your research assignment. Are you going to be focusing on topic development, where you're exploring and creating a research question? Another assignment might have you focus on information collection, where you're looking at different sources, source interfaces, and search terms. And then our last assignment has you focus on source credibility and relevancy. So looking at that information refinement process. Typically, one of the questions we get asked the most is this credible? And that, my friend, is a conversation. Now, at this point, I'm going to ask you to refer to your research appointment assignment. Which one of the three might you be completing today? Make sure you refer to that assignment and look at the different requirements and preparation. If you have any questions, contact the SFCC library or your instructor, and more information will be found on your research assignment itself. Thank you, and we look forward to sitting down with you and having a conversation with you about your research.